Hey everybody, welcome to the Squirrel Systems live stream. My name is Penn Clark. I'm going to be acting as moderator and production host for this series. Today we are talking about the recent regulation changes in Canada that the federal government has passed regarding GST and HST from December through to February. The exact dates are in the guidance. Couple housekeeping items before we get started. One, we are taking questions. So if you want to ask any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. You will need to be logged into either a YouTube or a Google account to do so. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward to drop them in the chat, and we will address those at the end of our two sessions. We do have two sessions kind of going today. Secondly, you can see on your screen right now there is a disclaimer. While we really want to help you guys understand how these changes impact your operations, we are not tax experts. We're not lawyers or accountants. Therefore, this should be seen as informational only. If you do have specific advice you're seeking around your operations, please contact a legal, tax, or professional service that deals with these kind of issues. This disclaimer is also in the video description. If you're wondering specifically how this might impact you, please take a look at that. And today we are super fortunate. We're being joined by some folks from Restaurants Canada. Richard Alexander is going to talk through some of the hows and whys of this regulation. He's the Executive Vice President of Restaurants Canada, and very familiar with government regulations and the processes behind those. And then after Richard, Will Gunn, who is the Director of Customer Success and runs our Solution Center here at Squirrel, is going to walk you through, how specifically you might tackle this within your Squirrel POS, or at least give you some idea around the concepts and best practices. So again, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. I will make sure that those get over to our guests today. And other than that, let's get started. Richard, I'm passing it over to you.
Good stuff. Thanks to Will and Penn for putting this on, guys. This is very helpful for everybody in the industry. Since government announced this tax holiday, I've been inundated with questions about POS systems. So you guys might not be tax lawyers. I am not an expert in POS systems. I'll tell you that right now, but I should have been before this announcement. So thanks for having me on, and thanks for putting this on for folks.
Thank you.
I'm just going to, there's been a lot of talk about this and what this means for the industry. And I don't think that the industry fully understands the positive impact this is going to have for restaurants in Canada, in every province of Canada. So I'll get to what the dollar figure is and that impact later on. But I just want to quickly tell you how we got to this point, or what's happened to get us to the point where we have a tax holiday on restaurant meals and alcohol. I describe this as an amazing, absolutely fabulous early Christmas gift for the restaurant industry. So for the last 10 months, at least, the government relations team at Restaurants Canada, we've been lobbying the federal government and MPs to address affordability for our industry. Because as you all know, the costs have gone up, and that's eating away profits and sometimes causing businesses to actually close. So we've been hammering that, and the reason that we've been hammering it is not just because it's an issue for the industry, but it's the number one issue for Canadians right across the country. It is a political issue, and the federal government is political, and we have to play in that direction. So that's why we were pushing affordability. So our initial ask about 10 months ago was for a reduction in employment insurance payroll taxes, because we're a labor-intensive industry, and reducing those payroll taxes will put money back into the pockets and to the operations of not only employees but employers. It was a big ask for the restaurant industry on the federal government. It was $1.7 billion ask. And to get us there, we held meetings with MPs. So we have a team of government relations vice presidents across Canada. Over the summer, we held 60 meetings with different MPs in their ridings during the summer break, pushing for some kind of an affordability challenge, affordability solution for consumers, but mostly for industry. We had 5 campaigns, social media campaigns and media campaigns that were targeted at MPs. So we geo-targeted the Liberal caucus retreat, cabinet retreat. We just finished another one just leading up to the fall economic statement, which should happen any day now. And in this process, we had 2 extremely positive meetings with the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister's office, they were looking for the same thing that we were, something on affordability. And when we brought up the idea of payroll taxes, they jumped on it. So we had an advocate, a champion for industry in the PMO, in the Prime Minister's office, and we also had several within the caucus and the cabinet of the Liberals. So when we started pushing this, we started to get some opposition, and so did the PMO, to changes in employment insurance payroll taxes, particularly from areas like Atlantic Canada. There was a resistance there around that because they were looking for an increase in benefits and make employment insurance more expensive in Atlantic Canada. It was not just Atlantic Canada, it was in some other areas. So there was opposition there to that, but the PMO knew that they had to do something on affordability. So they looked for other options, and they came up with this GST, HST holiday. So let me be clear. The original plan that was put forward in the Prime Minister's office did not include restaurants in that. It was just all the other things that they've announced, but not restaurant meals and not alcohol. So without speaking out of school, our advocate in the Prime Minister's office pushed and was able to get the restaurant industry added to this tax holiday, which is just huge. The other issue that they had was they were concerned about including alcohol in this because of the backlash from a number of different anti-consumption groups, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers Canada, and things like that. So what they settled on, they agreed to put alcohol into this tax holiday, which was another major thing that we were actually quite pleased with. But what they did as what I'll call a softener toward those anti-consumption groups was they removed spirits, because that's viewed as a higher percentage of alcohol and whatever. So the removal of spirits from this was a purely political thing. So they could say, look, we removed spirits from this. Government, when they made the announcement, they were hammered by these groups. There was a lot of pushback publicly on that, but they knew that was coming, and they accepted that. So I'll put up this. I'll share my screen here on this slide just because I think it's a little bit funny. But let's see here now. A little bit funny, but anyway, I'll just blow through this here now. So here's here's my picture that I thought was pretty funny. My parents really liked it, but so Restaurants Canada was the only organization that was invited to participate in the press conference. This GST holiday is really about the restaurant industry. There's a little bit of benefit, obviously, to retail, but we are the big winners in this. Whatever you think of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, it was important for us when government does something like this for an industry, for us to get out there and say this is a positive thing, and we've been doing that. We did a tremendous amount of media on that. We have to show appreciation for that, and we're going to continue to do that. I liken this GST HST holiday. It's when it comes to government relations and working on trying to get something for the industry. The Rolling Stones line, you can't always get what you want, but sometimes if you try real hard, you get what you need. This is one of these situations. So I'm still hopeful that we might get an EI payroll tax deduction in the fall economic statement when that comes by. But if it doesn't happen, it's hard to look a gift horse in the mouth sort of thing. So there's still a possibility there, but this was a big thing. So what does this mean for the restaurant industry? So we have a chief economist at Restaurants Canada who's been with Restaurants Canada for like 26 years. When the GST came on restaurant meals, it had a very, very negative impact on sales within the industry. And he uses all kinds of different things, elasticity of demand, to determine what the impact is. This is a huge impact, and the impact comes in increased sales by removing in some cases, a 15% tax on meals. So he's broken it down. Overall in Canada, it's $1.5 billion, close to $1.6 billion if you want to round up. So you can see there from this chart if what this actually means dollar figure. So there are some provinces that have an HST, which is a harmonized sales tax. In those cases, the federal government has some power over that. So it looks like, and they've asked us to lobby the provinces to go along with this tax holiday, and that's the reason I'm sitting in a hotel room in Halifax today. It's looking extremely positive. I'm about 95% sure that we're going to get all the HST provinces on board. We'll know soon enough. We're only 10 days out here now. So I'll just use one example. Like even without the provincial sales tax being included, for British Columbia, it's basically $160 million of additional spending in the restaurant industry in that province. That's significant over a 2-month period. So having said that, this is I had to obviously thank the Restaurants Canada team. So we have Mark von Schelwitz in Western Canada. We have Chris Barnier in Central Canada. We have Maximilien Roy in Quebec and Federal. We have our President CEO, Kelly Higginson. Milana Stanova is our comms Director of Communications and Public Affairs, and Shatija, she supports the team. So the hours that went into this was significant, and there was an amazing amount. And we have just an absolutely tremendous team. I never thought in my career that I'd have such a great team. I know you all have a lot of questions about the details of this, and so do we. So there is a webinar that's coming up that's being delivered by CRA. They haven't advertised it yet because this legislation has not received royal assent, and they're not able to do that. But coming up on Monday, there is as soon as this passes, we will send out a note to all the members to get on this webinar. I'll be there. I'll have the ability to ask questions live, just 2 questions. But so you just watch for that, and CRA will do their best to answer all your technical questions that the boys here decided not to answer and use your disclaimer. Anyway, having said that, one last thing before I go. What's next? So the government has opened the door on this tax holiday, particularly around the GST. There was a time when GST didn't apply to restaurant meals. They've opened the door. They've given us an opportunity. We are going to launch, Restaurants Canada is going to launch a campaign in the new year to try and make this GST tax break a permanent thing. Our working title for the campaign is called Food Tax Fairness. So hashtag Food Tax Fairness. And we're working very hard right now to get that campaign up. What you can do to help, we have 100,000 restaurants in Canada. When we send out a notice to you asking you to go to our website and send an email to your MP asking for this food tax fairness, can you imagine how powerful an ask that would be if every single restaurant in Canada got on board with that and did that? It would be impossible for the federal government to ignore us and all the political parties to ignore us. So I encourage you when you see that to really try and support what we're doing and support us supporting you folks. Anyway. That's it. It's long. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for giving us some context on how this came about and what the potential benefits for the industry are. Because I think people are really just looking at the short term, going but knowing sort of what potentially might come of this is very helpful. Couple questions. One question has come through from a couple different people. So, do you know how GST will be treated for something like gratuities on a large group. So many restaurants, if you're a group of 8 or 10 or 12, automatically add a gratuity. Do you know if that kind of gratuity or event reservation charges or service charges are also exempt?
So I will, I'm compiling a list of questions from the membership. We sent out an email earlier, I think it was yesterday. So and that's one of the questions that has come back to me for this CRA webinar. So I would like Will and Penn, I'm going to say we'll wait for CRA to give you the official answer.
We'll wait for
on that one.
guidance.
We'll wait for guidance, yeah.
On that webinar, everybody, if you are interested, Squirrel will be having this video as a video on demand, so you can come back and rewatch it. We will also, when we have it, put a link to that CRA webinar in this video and in our technical guidance around this topic as well. Last question, I think I know the answer to this, is GST going to be taken off of all alcohol served, or is it strictly on the guideline of anything under 7% ABV, or is there any wiggle room there?
Yeah, it's for ready to drink under 7%. Spirits are off the table for the reasons I outlined.
Yeah.
As a softener for the anti-consumption groups. And even if you mix it and it's got low alcohol content, that's the trade-off. You can't always get what you want. You get what you need. So
13% wine is exempt, but 6%
no, it doesn't make sense. A lot of things that governments do not make sense, and they make these announcements and they let the bureaucrats figure it out, and the bureaucrats are scrambling right now in Ottawa. I'll tell you that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Richard. Now, folks, we're going to turn it over to Will. Less about the what and the hows, or the what and the whys, rather. This is more about the how. So Will is going to take us through conceptually some of the best practices on how you can do this in your POS. Before I do that, if you have any questions specific to your operation or from a technical perspective, how do I do this, or I don't feel comfortable doing this, please, if you're a Squirrel customer, reach out to your sales representative, your account manager. We are offering a service to our customers to help walk them through this for a minor fee. So if you're comfortable doing this and you just want best practices, Will's going to walk you through that. If you're a little bit nervous or uncomfortable doing this, please just reach out to your account executive and we'll help you out. With that, Will.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Richard. That was very informative. Really appreciate all the legwork that went into that as well. Super interesting. Now, I was going to start actually with that last question of what's included, what's not, just to kind of recap. So might as well do that anyways still, just as a reminder for everyone. So I'll share my screen. This is from the Government of Canada site, just sort of laying out, particularly on the food and beverage related services, that this is available on their site today, and it kind of outlines it pretty well, I think. There are a few, corner cases like the service charge question. I think that one's interesting. It's not explicitly called out here, so yeah, I would wait. Otherwise, though, the most common question we got on this is this 7% ABV bit. So the way we're describing it is, don't think of it as, everything under 7% is exempt and everything over 7% is not exempt. If that's not the right way to think about it, it's all wine, beer, cider, sake, right? All of those things are all exempt under 23%. It's the spirit coolers and pre-mixed alcoholic beverages, 7% or less, still exempt, above are not exempt. So think of it that way instead. Don't think of it as, well, if I have a beer that's higher than 7%, or if I have a cocktail that's lower than 7%, that's more complicated than you need to make it. So just think of it that way. Hopefully that provides a bit of clarity. Okay, so let's get into what I wanted to cover today, which was sort of the back half of this is how to do this in Squirrel for those for Squirrel users. I'm going to break this into kind of two sections as well. One is just, kind of a common theme you're going to hear from me today is there's lots of ways to do this, and it's really going to depend, right? People hate that answer of, how do I depend? It depends on your region, your operation, your current configuration. So what I'll try to do is really help you understand how taxes and tax groups work within the Squirrel system, and then I'll also go through a demo of a pretty typical configuration, not to be prescriptive, but to give you an idea of how you might do this. So with that being said, let's dive right in here. So again, just as an example, so here's a bit of a hypothetical to walk you through how taxes and essentially how taxes get applied to a guest check that you ultimately deliver to your guest. So you've got a menu item. Let's call it a pasta for simplicity's sake. That menu item pasta obviously has a price and it has taxes. So depending on your province, you might have multiple taxes to choose from. So let's just, as an example, say you've got a GST, a PST, and an LST, liquor service tax. So, or liquor sales tax. So on that pasta, you would have to choose which taxes get assigned to that item, right? So in this case, GST and a PST, for example. Now imagine you also have another menu item like a whiskey. On that whiskey, you need a couple of taxes, GST and LST. So for every single menu item in your Squirrel system, you would need to choose which taxes, which is very repetitive and can get pretty complicated pretty quick, which is why to simplify the process, especially when there's lots of menu items and lots of alcohol items, this is a really small list here of 10 each, you could have hundreds. So it can get really complicated really quickly. The easier way to do it then is to group these things, right? So for example, we would take GST and PST and put them together into something that we would just call a tax group. That tax group, we can name it whatever we want. It doesn't show up on a guest check or anything like that. It's just for a convention, so you know what taxes are included in it. So you might call this tax group GST and PST. More commonly, people will name it based off the menu items that they apply to. So for example, you might have a tax group called food, and in that food tax group, you're going to have GST and PST. Similarly, you might have a tax group called liquor, and in that you'll have GST and LST. And it's the tax group then that gets assigned to the menu item, right? So instead of assigning different taxes to each item, you just assign a group. So food would get assigned to those food items, and the liquor tax would get assigned to all your liquor items. So that keeps it nice and simple. And for the purposes of this change that's coming up next week, it also makes it really simple, because if you want to remove the GST from all of your food items, you don't have to go and adjust all your menu items. All you have to do is remove the GST from that tax group, and you're done. Don't want to do that today, though. You want to wait. You want to wait until next week. Do that next week. However, for liquor, it would have been just as easy to just remove your GST from your liquor tax group. Unfortunately, we've got these exemptions. So you can't really think of all of your liquor today as all one bucket. You kind of have to separate it, right? So in this example here, in my very small list of 8 items, we might look at it as in, okay, whiskey, rum, tequila, and cocktails. You're all going to stay the same. You're going to keep this liquor tax group. Okay. Now, my wine, my beer, my cider, my coolers, less than 7%, would then need a new tax group, right? So we could call it whatever we want. Call it beer and wine, for example. And in that beer and wine tax group, you're going to have the exact same taxes as you would for your liquor. So you've essentially just created a replica of the liquor tax group, right? So GST and LST in both. And then kind of the pre-work that you can do now is go and assign this beer and wine tax group to all of those menu items, right? So you could do that today, because then you're not actually changing any taxes and how they apply to items at all. All you're doing is just kind of preparing for the easy change, which is remove the GST from your food and remove the GST from your beer and wine come next week, and then you're done. Okay. So again, there's few things to consider here. One is like the menu items aren't automatically grouped like this. Yes, they're categorized, but tax groups get assigned to items, not menu groups. So you do have to change all of these items one at a time, essentially. For those, kind of power users, our resellers and our corporate ITs, you might have tools available to you to do this en masse or easily copy using some. But for the average user, you're going into menu setup and you're assigning all these one by one. Could you change your GST to 0% instead? Sure, you could. We wouldn't recommend it because GST is not changing to 0. It is still 5%, and it still applies to things like liquor, and it still applies to things like retail items. So we wouldn't suggest that route. Could you do this another way where you keep your liquor tax group assigned to all your beer and wines and create a new tax group, call it spirits, for example, and apply it to those high alcohol ones? Sure, it doesn't really matter. It's really kind of what is what's going to work well for you. Another suggestion we've had from some clients is using the alt tax function. You could do that. So the alt tax function essentially allows you to apply at POS a different tax rate to a check. Most people set it to 0. So if you use the alt tax, it just sets the tax rate to 0. But then you're adding that step to a server for every single check. So that's a lot of work for your servers instead of doing the work up front here. Plus, it doesn't give you the option to make certain things exempt, like liquor. So we wouldn't recommend that either. Okay, so to recap, taxes get grouped together and those groups get assigned to items. Our recommendation is just create a new tax group, call it beer and wine, and assign that to all of your beer, wine, cooler, and ciders ahead of time, and then come next week, just remove your GST or HST from the appropriate groups. So let me show you how that works. I'll try to, I think we're running a little low on time here, so I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. One moment.
And that's all right. We'll take the time you need. And like I said, everyone, this will be a video on demand. If you want to, if you have to go, that's fine. We'll have it up on our channel. You can come back and watch it anytime.
Sounds good. Okay, so the demo I'm going to do it in our Squirrel Cloud system. If you've got Squirrel 11 or older versions, that's fine. The process is still the same no matter which version, essentially, and also including Squirrel Cloud. So the first thing you want to do is really kind of get a feel for how your taxes are currently configured. So what I would do is go into my tax setup under advanced setup. Again, same steps in Squirrel 11, and just take a look. Okay, what do I have for tax groups today? So this demo system here is pretty basic. It's got a couple of tax groups, right? Food, liquor, none, and retail. So if I want to go look at, let's say, my food tax, again, my food tax has 2 taxes in it, GST and PST, right? Makes sense. I might want to go look at my liquor tax and see that I've got a GST and PST in that one as well. Now the question is, okay, I know I need to create a new tax group. Do I want to create a beer and wine, or do I want to create a spirits one? And it really kind of depends, right? So the next step of this is I have to go and change a whole bunch of menu items. So I want to minimize that work for myself, so I'm going to choose whichever one has less. If I'm a restaurant that has a really massive wine list, 100 pages of wines and a big cellar, I'm probably going to go change my cocktails instead of my wines. But if I'm the opposite and I've got this massive, I run a whiskey bar and I don't even sell wine or beer at all, obviously that makes it easy. So it really depends on you. So you could do this a number of different ways. The easiest way for me is I would just take a look at my category. So I might just go pop into my menu entries here and look. So I look at my beer. I go, okay, this is a demo database, so it's relatively small numbers here, but I might have 20 beer. Okay, and then I go look at my liquor. Okay, not very many liquor, maybe 10. Again, unrealistic. I get these are small numbers. And then I might go look at my wine and see, okay, I've got a couple of pages of these, maybe it's 20 or 30. So I've got quite a bit more wine and beer than I do liquor. So in this case, I'm actually going to create a new tax group for my high ABV liquor, okay, because that'll be less work for me. So I'll go ahead and go into my tax groups. And I'm just going to add a new tax group. And we'll call it beer and wine. Okay, and in there I want to copy exactly what was on my liquor. So remember, it was GST and PST for my configuration. So I'm going to save that. Okay, now I've got this tax group. So the taxes were already existed. I didn't change the taxes. I only created a new tax group, used the existing taxes in there, and now I'm going to go apply it to my menu items. So I'll just pop into my menu items here. And let's go to this first item, Cape Cod. And in the menu entry setup, you're looking for a field that says tax group. You're just going to change that to beer and wine and hit save. Okay, so all I've done there is change the tax group on that item. Because the tax group is an exact replica of liquor, I haven't actually changed the tax amounts that are going to show up on guest checks or anything like that. So you don't need to worry about doing that in advance. You can do that today. So I'll just do a couple more. So again, I'm just going to choose, oh, I didn't mean to call this one beer and wine. Sorry, guys. I've been doing it this way for the last week, and this is how we documented it. And then intentionally wanted to change it here and made a mistake there. I meant to call it spirits. So let me just go change that. There we go. Okay. So now on December 13th, when I want to go change this, all I could do is pop into my food tax here, and I can just unflag my GST, and that's done. And then I would pop into my liquor tax, because that's the one that's currently applied to all my beer and wine. I didn't make any changes there. Unflag my GST, and that's done. And then my spirits one, I'm going to leave as is, because that's all my high alcohol drinks, and the GST is going to remain on that one. Okay. So yeah, there's lots of corner cases there as far as the service charge questions, or what if I have tax inclusive, and I don't know, quite a few. I think the majority of our audience here is kind of going to fit into that camp of, you know what you're doing already, you just need some reassurance, or hey, it's a holiday season, I don't want to deal with this at all. So yes, reach out to us and we can handle it on your behalf. Or this third camp who maybe just needed a bit of guidance or a bit of advice. So hopefully that was helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will.
Yeah, no worries.
We do have a couple questions. One is, and I'm not sure this makes any difference, but I'm not sure it doesn't. So it's from an operator who's asking that their business day runs from 5 a.m. to 4:59 a.m. the next day instead of the usual 12 to 12. How should they approach the timing of this come December 14th?
Yeah, that's pretty common. So handle it just like you would any other change in Squirrel. So that timing 12 to 12 is actually quite rare, right? Most restaurants are open past that, so it's usually more of a 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. rollover is what we call it. So I would just make the changes the day before. So if you want these to go live on the 14th, those final changes, do them on the 13th, and then that way on your your automated shutdown and start new business day that night, it would take effect that night. If you're a truly 24/7 operation using what we call rollover, where it doesn't shut down and start, casinos, hotels, things like that, you'll want to manually do that process just like you would any other what we call advanced setup change. Yep.
Right. Okay. So this does require, obviously, if you're particularly on Squirrel 11, it does require a end of business day shutdown restart to take effect,
Correct.
much like any other significant change in the POS.
For Squirrel Cloud users, it takes effect immediately, though. So
right. So if you're on Squirrel Cloud,
yeah,
don't do it the morning of the 13th, or you're going to have a day of taxes to
do it on
deal
the
with.
14th.
Okay, another question. This one might fall a little bit more to Richard, or it might be wait and see. I think it's more of a wait and see. It's a customer asking, Prince Edward Island is still not certain about the provincial portion of the HST. Obviously, we can't answer, but they're asking more. Is there a date? Have you heard if there's a date when these provinces might know or might have this finalized?
So I did some media in Prince Edward Island. I was on CBC Compass, and about 6 hours before I was going on to complain about not announcing it, they announced it. So PEI is 100% all HST. So is Newfoundland and Labrador. So is Ontario. The two holdouts are Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, which is why I'm here. But I would expect to hear something very shortly. Nova Scotia, when operators call the government asking about this, they're telling them it's the full 15%, but they haven't made an announcement. They just finished election too. They're still in, and so I expect same thing is basically happening in New Brunswick. So we're pretty confident it's going to be the full 15% discount on all your food and drinks, except spirits, no spirits.
Spirits makes it easier, certainly from a configuration.
Now we just got to get the PST provinces on board too.
Yeah, so
I'll
just run through this quickly because I don't know who. So British Columbia never had PSD on restaurant meals, but they did have it on liquor. So Mark, our vice president there, he's pushing to get liquor included, alcohol included. Sorry. Saskatchewan was a hard no. Manitoba, we met with the finance minister a few days ago, and they're considering. That's Manitoba, and that's it. That's everybody. Oh, Quebec is a hard no. Yeah.
Okay. So as you can see, folks, this is still, a little bit of a moving target just from a government and legislation perspective. Restaurants Canada is doing a fantastic job. So if you want to keep up with the latest information, highly suggest you bookmark their FAQ page and check back there regularly, because that's where this stuff is going to be first available. A couple last questions. I think you just answered this one. Any news on Quebec for PSD? I think Quebec was a hard no, you said. Okay, so sorry, Quebec. It makes it a little more complex. And then we have a question around, do you know when the expected Senate vote and the confirmation of the legislation is expected?
I've been busy all day. I was hoping I'd have a text message. It could be any time. So I'd say within the next. Let's be conservative and say by the end of the week.
Yeah. Okay. So by excuse me, but by Monday we should, as an industry, know more specifics around the actual legislation itself, rather than the guidance.
Yeah, that CRA webinar is ready to go. They just can't announce it. So I'm gonna check right now live to see where it is, and I'll let you know if I see something there.
And we'll post updates, updated links and resources to our Help Center article when those come out as well.
Yeah, as well. And watch, if you're a Squirrel customer, watch for a newsletter next week, which will be coming out both with the on-demand version of this video and also with any additional guidance we've heard concerning the legislation. Last question is a customer who has a lodge with prepaid packages. So if the packages are paid for before the legislation takes effect on the 14th, do they collect the GST and then refund it if the package is occurring within the window, or what are any thoughts there?
I think that was covered on that article, but I don't know off the top of my head.
So for the person who asked that question, that's an excellent question. I think that falls into some of the gray areas. We will take that, and once we have really crystal clear understanding around the legislation, we'll send you a link. We'll post it in the chat on the video on demand, and we can follow up on that. Just a clarification from another viewer, the tax holiday takes effect starting at 12:01 a.m. On the 14th. So businesses open later than that. So for instance, if you're open till 1 or 2 in the morning, you'll need to do a restart during your business hours to make that take effect at 12:01 a.m. Because obviously that's when the 14th starts.
That's a good clarification. I hadn't really considered that. I thought, I was considering like it takes effect at the opening of business on the 14th. But you're right. If it's at midnight, you would need to shut down and start a new business day on that night. Yeah. Sorry, Richard. Something to add there?
Yeah. So we presented to the Senate on this issue 2 days ago. So they're rushing it through the Senate. It could be as soon as today, but likely tomorrow, with the caveat that things could turn to explicitive. Bleep that part out. So it could be next week, but it's looking good for today or tomorrow.
Okay, and this is a hot topic. We're still getting questions, so if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to continue.
Yep, sure.
And address as many as we can. Okay. One question is from an operator who doesn't run your sort of traditional restaurant, but does do food and beverage service to events and meetings and those kind of functions. Does this apply to their business? My gut tells me it does, but
yeah, that's what we've been told. Yes, it does. Yeah, okay. Catering, that kind of stuff.
So catering, exactly. Any kind of event halls, those kind of things are also under the blanket of this legislation.
And I think they explicitly called that out as well in the article, as far as types of operations, and that was included.
Okay. One question from somebody who's here in British Columbia. So British Columbia is currently doesn't have PST on some items. So since things like beer, food, wine, coolers are going to be exempt from both GST and PST, does it make sense to create a no tax group and apply that? I think you did address this, and I think the issue there is that you're creating a bunch of work for yourself because you'd essentially have to go. You'd have to go and change it anyways on day of. But Will, if you could provide some guidance there.
Yeah, I think the struggle there is the undo come February. So reason why we would suggest creating a new one, and sure, you could call it a no tax group, but you might already have that. And so if, come February, you want to undo it, instead of going and changing all those menu items, you could just re-add those taxes back to that tax group, right? So it's 2 clicks instead of, a couple thousand, depending on how big your menu is. So I wouldn't recommend doing that only for that reason when it comes time to undo it. Now, hopefully, Richard and team make it so you never have to undo it and this is permanent, right? But that's a long-term goal. But I wouldn't count on it. So yeah, I wouldn't do it that way. Awesome. You could call it that, but if you already have one, it's probably already in use for certain things. I don't know, water or whatever, untaxed things. Yeah.
All right, so that is the end of our questions. For the folks viewing, if you think of something you're like, I didn't ask that and I should have, absolutely feel free to comment on the video on demand or just send an email to Squirrel Systems, info@squirrelsystems.com, and we'll try to answer anything that comes in there. A big thank you to Richard and Restaurants Canada for taking time out to be with us today. Really, great to have you. Great to get a viewpoint from somebody who's been a lot closer to the process than obviously most of us have. Last question, just snuck in. What happens if, for whatever reason, you don't make the changes for December 14th due to logistics or complications or some other variable? I don't think anybody knows that answer, and that's getting perilously close to tax advice. So I think probably reach out to your accountant, unless Richard or Will, you have any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, if you can't for some reason, again, logistics, I would strongly recommend reaching out to us. Let us do it for you if there's a resource constraint, something like that, because it's there's the tax rules on that and what the impact of that might be, but mostly it's about your guest. Your guest is going to ask you why, that Saturday, hey, I thought I wasn't paying taxes anymore, how come it's on my check? And so but if you do find yourself in that scenario, the alt tax function in Squirrel is probably your best workaround, but it's not it's not entirely accurate for how that applies. So
Yeah, and
would
that
recommend
applies.
just reaching out to us. Yeah.
That applies to every check, so your server's got to do that for every check, and there's potential for human error there. But yeah, and actually, just before we go, Will brings up another point that I just want to reinforce. If you're not comfortable making these changes in your Squirrel system, please reach out to either your account executive or info@squirrelsystems.com, and we will we'll find a solution to help you be successful as these changes roll out. All right. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, all of Restaurants Canada. If you want to share this with a colleague, or you want to come back and view it again, the live version will be available on demand today, and we will have a cleaned up, slightly edited version re-uploaded by this time tomorrow. And we'll share that next week in our newsletter. Until then, take care.
Thanks, guys. Good
Thanks.
job.
My pleasure. Thank you.